Okay, hello everyone. Hi, Katy and Roshan. Thanks so much for being a part of our online birth story circle. And as you know, you had attended one of these when you were expecting the whole idea of Delhi Birth Network hosting these events is that we come together and we share with each other our birth experiences and hear these stories incomplete because what we felt is that people hear bits of birth stories here and there that this happened and it was a cesarean, it was a normal birth, and but they don't really hear the whole thing, and it's always in a context, and we feel that therefore we felt it's important to give that space to hear out a full story, starting from the time you thought of having a child to what your experience was, how your birth panned out, how the early days are. So that's the whole idea of this, and to hear these from the people who've experienced it themselves recently. Would you like to first start with telling me how old your little one is now? When was he born? So we know how far you are in your parenting journey.
So our son Madhu is short for Madhavan. He was born almost exactly 7 weeks ago on the very first day of India's lockdown. I went into labor the night before, just after the Prime Minister gave his speech about the lockdown. So we were really in the thick of it for this whole COVID kind of emergency. But yeah, that's how old he is, and it feels like 100 years ago, and also like yesterday.
So yeah, so let's start from the beginning. Tell us, as early as you would like to go, what was your experience during your pregnancy, physically, emotionally? What was it like? What was going on with you at that time, and how things changed for you when you got pregnant?
Well, do you want to start? Or do you want me to start?
Sure, start.
So, I mean, Roshan and I were very clear that we wanted to have children together, basically almost as soon as we met. And so it was really important for us to, that was like an important part of what we thought we wanted. So basically our plan was, okay, I was 37 when we were about to get married, and so we said, okay, let's actually start trying to get pregnant basically immediately, because since I'm of an advanced gestational age, like who knows if I'll be able to get pregnant or not. A lot of my friends had trouble.
Just an interjection. We had finished, the wedding, sort of exchanging garlands, sitting on the mandap, and my aunt, who is a gynecologist, I think I've told you before, just comes up to us and whispers. She's like, it's quite late. You should get started. Like we're not even, the fire is still burning. I mean.
So our families were very keen, obviously, and we were also very keen, but we didn't really tell them that. We were just like, okay. And we didn't want to, our expectations were actually pretty low. I was thinking, we have to, it might be complicated, it might be difficult. And so let's just not have too many expectations. But as it happened, we ended up getting pregnant about a month after we got married, a little less than a month after we got married. And to be honest, I don't think either of us was entirely ready for that, because it was
too soon.
Yeah,
we're like, okay, it'll happen this year,
or next year, or like we'll go on some trips, we'll go on a honeymoon. No, we didn't. I got pregnant. We found out when I was visiting my family in the U.S., and Roshan had come also. I was convinced I had the flu, but I, of course, was in fact pregnant. And it was, I think, the beginning of what was, for me, a pretty tough pregnancy. Like I was pretty sick in my first trimester. I was still commuting to my college where I teach, which is almost 2 hours away, one way. So it was really tough. I think it was pretty hard. So much so that I almost didn't think too much about what the delivery was going to be like, what the early months of it was just like, just get through every day and you'll eventually get to the point where you can figure this out. And probably because of that, as soon as I got back to Delhi from the US, I just asked for recommendations for hospitals, just like other people who I knew that just delivered in the last year. Like, where did you go? Okay, I'll go there. And so I ended up, we went to, for the first couple of months of my pregnancy, we went for prenatal appointments to a big kind of corporate hospital. I think they're very well regarded, and it wasn't a bad experience exactly. It just it didn't really click. It didn't feel like I was absolutely certain that I wanted to try for a vaginal delivery. And also that the most important thing for me was safety. So I didn't want to just have a home birth where I wanted to have doctor support, but I wanted to make sure that doctors were like on my same page, that they understood what I wanted, even though at that point I actually didn't really know what I wanted yet. I knew that I wanted like something more on the natural side, but I didn't exactly know what it was. But I already felt like these doctors maybe are not, I just don't know whether they're actually totally on board with what I'm saying.
It was strange because I think we went with some questions, we done some research, and then we went with some questions. The doctor was okay with answering them, but I think within about 2 minutes of leaving her office, two people sort of started stalking us. One lady says, "Sir, bill ke bare mein socha hai?" I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, we literally haven't even talked about this birth. Somebody wants to bill us already."
For the delivery, they wanted us to take a package.
Yeah.
I was 9 weeks pregnant.
It was not even 9 weeks. I mean, we were there basically to confirm that she is pregnant. Yeah. And they are already sort of saying, deluxe room, super deluxe room. Like, so that totally turned us off. It's like,
the real thing that bothered me was that my friend who had said, like, she ultimately was happy with what happened, but she had an unplanned cesarean section. And she, at the time, didn't know why. And she couldn't really feel like, and that really concerned me. And one of the things that she told me is that our OBGYN was not there when I went in to deliver. And so that just got me thinking, like, okay, well, even if our doctor is on board, what about the rest of the doctors? What about the support staff? What about the nurses? What are they doing? Because ultimately it'll actually depend a lot more on them than on the main doctor. I was very anxious about this, and I think you remember that. That was one of my biggest kind of struggles during pregnancy, was working with this anxiety and desire for control, which, of course, as you know, is not something that you really get in terms of the birth process, but the things that I could control, I guess, were finding this medical team that would somehow support me.
Yeah. So how did you go about searching for another option and finding someone? And also then, if you can tell us that how did you plan for your birth? What is the information that you were seeking? Did you find some books that were useful? How did you find a childbirth preparation class? Why did you feel you need one? And how did you prepare for your birth?
And so I started talking to a few of my colleagues, saying, it seems like I don't know, it just seems like women aren't given much of an option in the hospital. You're just supposed to go in and be on a conveyor belt. And then people laughed and said, yes, it's like that, but this and that. And so finally, a couple of people mentioned Sitaram Bharti, saying, that's the place where I feel like I can actually say something. I actually have a conversation with my gynecologist. It's not just go in and do, you're not at the mercy of the doctor and stuff. I mentioned that to Katy.
It's not to say that that it's actually going to be great necessarily, but it made a difference. It's like, oh, they're actually, at least someone here is thinking about
they're aware of these things.
Breastfeeding, lactation consultants, the importance of skin-to-skin contact right after birth. It's like, oh, this isn't actually anything that I've even seen on in the other hospital. It's like very exciting. Like, okay.
And for me, it was exciting because there were several things that insisted on sort of the partner being there. Whereas in all the other cases, it was just like, yeah, you are the guy who has to pay for the room, and otherwise you are there to attend, and we'll send you a selfie or God knows. Like there's not a lot of sort of participation. Right?
Yeah,
so
no. But so what do we do to prepare for birth? We did okay. So I mean, this was where I did feel like I was going a little crazy. We got a bunch of books.
Are they there?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, yeah.
We have the two books that we read. One is called Great Expectations, which is pretty just like neutral, a lot of good information, very concise. And also this other book called The Birth Partner, which is this Penny Simkin book, which is has sort of lays out the actual birth process in excruciating detail. It's very, very, very detailed. They're very, yeah, evidence-based birth I found really helpful. It shows you what the scientific evidence around different aspects of birth is. Of course, it also shows you that there's not a scientific consensus around a lot of different aspects of birth and around a lot of different interventions. So it did start to make me wonder, how am I going to make sure that I can make the right choice as different things happen in this sort of unpredictable birth situation?
I mean, I think it was good around then, just when we started reaching out, we found you, but we also found, I mean, through you, we met all those people at the birth circle, which was super useful. But then also around us, I think Katie's best friend had just given birth a few months before us. And so reaching out to her, or just trying to dig around and say, okay, who around us is actually in the same boat,
Basically, the preparations of the birth class, and specifically our first sessions, including the session where we met you, was kind of about thinking about our pregnancy and our birth and our child areas as a kind of as a kind of emotional journey that we needed to kind of refocus on. If you remember, the first question that you asked us was, "What are you afraid of?" So at that time, Roshan's fear was of, not being asked to be in control, being asked to stand up to doctors and like defend my choices. And he said that very clearly, and I think you really helped him kind of think about it as his own thing and not necessarily something that I was like doing to him. But then when you asked me what my biggest fear was, it was literally, I mean, the answer was literally everything. And I think I just like cried and cried for like 10 minutes. The way that we worked through it first was about, just allowing space to feel those feelings and to think through what it would be like to sort of what were the real things that were possible, that were plausible, that were definitely going to happen, and thinking about how to make peace with the unknown, which that was the whole process from the beginning. And I'm so glad it was, because the actual birth and of course the actual sort of political and biological circumstances, they got so crazy. So I mean, I'm really grateful for that, for being able to think ahead of time about just like, this is uncertain.
Yeah.
You have to become comfortable with it. How are you going to do that?
Absolutely.
Well, one of the things also I wanted to say about the preparation was the usefulness for me of these different meditations. So as the pregnancy kept progressing and sort of would throw up new and different unexpected things every month, the value of like making that time to just kind of refocus my mind was just, it was amazing. That was extremely helpful, and that's something that I would really recommend.
Okay, so now tell us, after all this preparation, and how did it pan out? What happened? How was the last few weeks? How did your birth happen?
Yeah, so the first thing is that my parents were supposed to come about 3 weeks. They were 2-ish weeks before his due date, and they were due to fly from the US. I would say, I think about 4 days before they were supposed to come, the news came that the coronavirus had come to Delhi. They had to cancel their trip because they're both over 60, and so it wasn't safe. So no problem. My sister will come instead. She's young, she's healthy, it's great. So she was due to come, I think, on Tuesday or something. That Friday, the government of India declared that all visas would be canceled starting Monday. So my sister also couldn't come. So of course, this was my lifeline. This was the thing that I was definitely depending on to keep myself sane and to feel like we could actually handle postpartum period safely and comfortably. And so I was a total wreck. I was so sad and so upset, and more destabilizing things to have happen. To know that I wouldn't have any of my female relatives to do this kind of, birthing process with me. But so we were still going on these long walks every day. And so on these walks, we started doing more talking through what it was going to be like, reassuring each other that it was going to be fine. And one of the things that Roshan was able to do is tell me that he was there for me, which sounds, generic, but he was very, very reassuring to me. And of course, you were going to be there. Of course, what ended up happening is as my due date got closer and I started going for my weekly, towards the end of your pregnancy, you go every week for prenatal visits. My doctor started getting, at first she was not nervous. She was just like, don't worry about it. This coronavirus thing, like it's happening, but just it's not really here yet. And so it's not worth borrowing trouble. Well, my very last OBGYN visit, I think it was when I was almost 40 weeks. She was totally different on that visit. And the hospital had started putting in procedures and to deal with this COVID crisis. And she, more than that, she who was extremely level-headed, extremely calm, she was just like, yeah, ordinarily I'd be fine letting you go another week. Like the baby feels fine. The baby is pretty big. And he's a little bit not exactly straight up and down, but it's okay. But ordinarily it'd be okay to let you go another week, but I want you to get this baby out of you before Monday. And I think it was a Wednesday or something. And so it was not my plan. I really was just like, I just want this to keep going until he's ready to emerge into the world. I don't want to push it. But she was because she was so nervous and because she's such a cool, calm, and collected person, I kind of went along with the intervention that I ordinarily wouldn't have gone for, which was a cervical sweep. So she really wanted to give me a cervical sweep to see if she could sort of jumpstart labor. And I guess a cervical sweep you can't do unless your cervix is slightly dilated. So I had some dilation, and I was obviously about to go into labor at some point very soon, like in the next week, probably. Like my body was such that I could tell I was having all of these painless contractions, and I was having a lot of like cervical pain and I was having all of these pains. So as we would go on these walks, I'd have to stop constantly because I had these sharp shooting pains straight down my body, which felt somehow exciting. Like, okay, this whole thing is going to start. But the way I wanted it to start was naturally, Anyways, that we came home, there was a hailstorm, the weather was strange, everything about that day was just strange. And I started having contractions immediately, remember? And so, no, even even before, I remember I had to take this long nap, and we put hot packs, like hot water bottles on my back because I was having these painful contractions, but they were irregular. By the time it was evening, though, nothing had progressed. I was just, the contractions kind of went away. So we had dinner and we went on our walk as normal, but we went a little late because we had to listen to this prime minister's speech where we're just like, oh my God, it was the day that he declared that there was going to be this emergency, that there was going to be quarantine, and it was going to start the following day or that day at midnight, I guess. We went on this walk. And and this is funny because when you asked me, Neha, how do I picture my birth or my whole like labor and all, I couldn't picture it. And I think I told you that. I said, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't feel comfortable even saying what I think is going to happen. But the one thing I would concede was like, I think I'm going to go into labor. I want to go into labor while I'm on one of these walks that we go on. And so sure enough, as we were walking along a very short track, and we were going around and around and around it. And I was having contractions, but I had been having these irregular contractions all day until Roshan realized that I was having a contraction at the same point of the little circle every single time. And we're like, So we go home, we waited a while. And I really wanted to wait until my contractions were very close together, very regular, very strong. But because of the quarantine situation and because we were relying on somebody else's car, we decided around 3 a.m. that we would just go to the hospital anyways, even though it was pretty early. And I knew it was early and I felt like it was too early. And that was one of the things, that was sort of the first thing, no, I guess that was the second thing that was not part of the plan. I wanted to wait. And I wrote this in my birth plan. I wrote like, I will wait until such and such a time. That didn't happen. So we got to the hospital and got checked in. After going through police checkpoints, they almost didn't let us through, even though I'm obviously 9 months pregnant. And I don't know, I guess it just seemed weird to have this lady like groaning in the back seat of these two guys in the front seat of a car. The highlights of what I remember is that the beginning part was kind of rushed. The doctors on call were not the doctors I usually worked with, but because I was sort of confident in this group practice model that Sitaram has, I was like, okay, I know they will at least do right by me. The one thing that was really frustrating was that they wouldn't check us in because I wasn't dilated enough. I wasn't far along my pregnancy. It couldn't be called active labor yet. So I was just sitting in this triage room for the longest time where they would monitor me constantly. I mean, they were actually doing the fetal heart rate monitoring at, I think, every like 30 minutes or 20 minutes, like very short intervals. It was extremely frustrating because I had to get into a position on my back that was really, really uncomfortable at that point. That was really hard. And that was the first kind of piece where I realized like, oh, these choices that I made, they weren't part of my plan. Like I can see why I wish I hadn't made them. I understand why I've done what I've done and it's fine. And that was, I think, part of the moment where I kind of tried to sort of reach into myself and really accept that the situation was the situation and that we were going to do the best we could with what we had. And so finally I was transferred to a room, but they continued to do fetal heart rate monitoring every half an hour. And so there's a long period where I actually don't remember what was happening. The only thing I remember being totally in a zone with Roshan. And the other thing that couldn't happen is that you couldn't come because of the police checkpoint. And I was horrified. I was so sad about it. But we kept calling you and just saying like, oh, they're doing this. What do you think we should do? And give us the advice that, that in some sense I already knew most of the time, like what was the right call, but you were really reassuring. But so yeah, Roshan was taking me and we were just looking at each other for hours and hours and hours. And he was tapping my back, I think, like 1, 2, 3. And I think he was even counting out loud as we got through each contraction. So I felt like we were doing it together. And I think this was like 10 or 15 hours of contractions. Like it was a long time. So I remember being in a lot of pain and being really frustrated by the fact that people wouldn't leave me alone. Like I wanted to be left alone. I just wanted to be completely quiet. I wanted to be asleep, basically, and a lot of the time. I remember that's the main sort of emotional thing I remember is just wanting people to go away so that I could go to sleep. And I think that was both something that probably people should have listened to more at different periods. And at some points, Roshan did drive everyone out and let me sleep, including sort of after transition when I was supposed to be pushing, and I wasn't. He was just like, everyone has to leave. She has to rest. Major highlight, after this sort of long slog of a full day, I was in labor for 25 hours. And so the part that I remember most is this kind of the long slog of the day in which there were several interventions. I know that I had a cervical ripener. I know at some point they started Pitocin because my contractions were ebbing. And then towards the end of the labor, the last, I think, 4 or 5 hours, I had a very long period where I was like transition and pushing. I would think I was supposed to be pushing, or I was like in this stage where I was supposed to be pushing for about 4 or 5 hours. And no one liked that. That was very scary for the doctors, I think. And to their credit, they let it go. They let me keep just kind of, they kept checking me, seeing that there was some slight progress or that at least the fetus's heart was fine. And so they would say like, okay, well, you can keep going. And at some point, I think I actually told Roshan, like, I don't think I can do this anymore. I need to just have a cesarean section. Like, I can't do it. I physically can't do it.
That's usually the point after which you have the baby.
I think I had the baby like 4 hours later.
No,
Well, you were.
It says it was half an hour before I had the baby.
There you go.
But so I was very desperate. My doctor, at that point, my main doctor was on call for the daytime, and she was very supportive. She came in and and was, at one point I knew that I'd chosen the right doctor because she was explaining what I wanted. She was explaining my preferences to another doctor or to a nurse or somebody on staff. And she said, no, she'll be okay with it as long as it's evidence-based. She'll be fine with it as long as we explain it to her. And I was like, that's right, you got it. The main highlight though was during this pushing process, a different doctor was telling me, like, if you're not making any progress basically, and so you we're going to have to give you an episiotomy and get your baby out with forceps, or I think it was forceps. And I was just like, no. But everyone says, like, oh, you'll have this major urge to push. And time came to push. I said, okay, you need to push. When you feel the urge to push, you can push. And I was just like, I've got nothing. I'm exhausted. It's been a whole day. I have literally nothing to give you. So go away. At one point, Roshan did chase people away. I did go to sleep for about 20 minutes, I think. Hi, baby. And but sort of at some point it just became clear, like, okay, if you don't do this, you got to push somehow. There was a kind of moment where I felt myself like reach all the way down into my kind of self and just make the decision that I wanted to just go ahead and have the baby. Like, everyone that I had ever heard of had talked about this pushing phase as a very physical thing. Like, oh, it just happens. You have this urge. It's a physical urge. I didn't feel that, but I felt this like mental surety. Like, I need to do this. This needs to happen. I need to somehow connect with my body to make it eject this baby, because I can't, my body's not going to do it by itself. And it was all about positioning. I got into, I actually started squatting, and it really helped. I had been on my side, which had been more comfortable, but it wasn't moving things along. Somehow when I was squatting, I could just feel not exactly the urge, but I could make my muscles work. And so we did that for a long time, to the point where, and then somebody said, oh, he's crowning. I was like, that's not true. It's just not possible. Like, nothing is happening. It's been the same for 75 hours. So how is it possible he's crowning? But it was. And so I ended up being sort of bent over. So standing up, I was bent over the bed, which was elevated. Roshan was across from me, and we were looking into each other's eyes. And I remember that when they were asking me to push, I gave one push and they said, stop, don't push anymore, just wait. And my contractions at that point, they were not that strong. I was still on Pitocin. It had been jacked up a little bit, but not to it was not to a degree where I was actually still having strong contractions, and they were far apart. So I remember waiting like what seemed like 10 minutes, which I don't think it was. It's probably like 30 seconds. But I waited to give the next push, which was the push that sort of birthed Madhu. And that, the other thing I strongly, of course, remember is looking down onto the floor. The doctors and nurses were holding this tarp, and he just flopped out like a little seal. He was huge and he was wriggly, but he didn't cry, didn't make any sound. And they somehow, I don't know how I was flopped back on my back, but I got into the bed somehow, and we were able to do extended skin to skin contact for I don't know how long. But then they took the pediatrician came to our bedside, did all of the initial things right there, and he was off of me for maybe 2 minutes, and then he was given back to me, and he started rooting and breastfeeding almost immediately. He was so big and strong. It was just absolutely wild. But I also remember a feeling that I had was that I thought that I would cry when I saw him, but I didn't cry at all because I was so overwhelmed with everything that had happened. But it was there were so many twists and turns, and I know I feel like I could tell it in a more dramatic way, but it actually feels like this big fog, but a kind of triumphant fog. Especially the end part I felt really lucid and really in control of my own situation, and I felt like Roshan was like he was my coach. I mean, he was getting me through all of the pain, and he was getting me through all of the different choices. And I know he can tell you more about what he did, but that thing that he was afraid of confronting the doctors, he was doing it constantly.
That was so beautiful. A story like this in so much detail, you can't not be there, watch it happening, and that's what was happening with me. I was like in the room. Thanks so
It
much.
was,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
And I love how you spoke about your emotions, because unlike what a lot of people think, it is not just a physical process. It's equally as much or more an emotional journey. And it is at that point when you're emotionally ready that you actually start bringing the baby out. So
Absolutely.
that's beautiful.
Absolutely. It really, it felt like like there's this physical transition, and it also felt like there was a mental transition at some point where I was suddenly just needed to get him into the world.
Just coming back to that earlier idea of like what is actually the function of a man in this whole process. If you want to take a step back and talk about that. Here it was, I mean, one thing I want to say just separately, maybe from the last question, was just the best thing I think I did was take some time off before the birth. Instead of trying to time this paternity leave with the birth, I would say, that even a few days extra beforehand really makes a world of difference. So I think like what you were saying about these walks, and a lot of the birth happened before we entered the room, I think.
That's so beautifully said. I think that if you're just able to have that connection with each other, that's all you need. You don't need to know anything. If you're connected, and if you spend some time, like you said, through your pregnancy to do that, that is exactly what helps you in labor. If you can now finally just tell us a little bit about, your postpartum experience, if you have anything there that you want to mention. Was it different from what you expected? Was any whatever you want to share about that part of the journey?
Yeah, our postpartum situation has also been a lot different than we planned. We spent a lot of time, Roshan and I, between the two of us, sort of negotiating which parents would be here when, because all of our parents were very eager to come. Of course, and we had a lot of kind of fairly complex arguments about what kind of help we needed versus what kind of, privacy and other kinds of things we needed, and how to balance all of these needs between all these different people. Of course, at the end of it, my parents couldn't come, my sister couldn't come, his parents couldn't come, his sister couldn't come, you couldn't come, no one could come. And we could
house help. We hired someone to be a nanny and house help for that time. She also didn't come,
so suddenly we're plunged into the situation where we're doing all of the baby care, of course. We're learning how to be parents. We're doing all the laundry, we're doing all the cooking, we're doing all the cleaning, we're doing everything for ourselves. And of course, that actually means Roshan is literally doing 98% of everything, and I am just trying to breastfeed, and that's basically it, and recover. So for the first 2 weeks, it was that. The thing that was unexpected for me is that I was ready for the first 2 weeks to be hellacious, really hard, really painful. As it turned out, they weren't that bad. It was hard. It was definitely it wasn't physically unchallenging. But I didn't have an episiotomy. So, and I didn't, I was able to kind of get away with that only fairly minimal tearing. And so I was not that physically uncomfortable. Breastfeeding was really hard though. And that was something I wasn't exactly expecting. I think I somehow thought that was going to be easier. But that was something where I really, really wished I wanted my mom, I wanted my sister, I wanted support. I think that our second night home from the hospital, when my milk still hadn't properly come in, it was just starting to come in. And I know that one of the ways that it comes in is basically by communication with the baby, and the baby communicates by sucking constantly, and then that starts the milk supply. Well, he suckled for literally, and I do not exaggerate, 12 hours from 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. I have never been so distraught in my life. It was so upsetting. Like, when is he going to stop? When am I going to sleep? I was afraid I was going to drop him. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know about the side lying position. I didn't know what was going on. I was so, and then I was just like, oh God, it's going to be like this. I can't do this. This will be impossible. And then of course my milk came in and it was much different. But even as as we went along, we, around the 2 week to 3 week mark, he kind of woke up and had a lot more energy and suddenly needed a lot more from us. And also started becoming a lot more upset, being a lot more vocal, a lot more crying at night, screaming on the breast, like doing all of these things. We were just like, oh my God, what is this? Our baby was, we had this kind of bump in the road, then our baby was fine. And now he's turned into this like monster, like who will not be quiet and not let us sleep. And I don't know, how did we get through that? That we only got through, I think, through sheer perseverance, patience. Everybody kept saying it's going to end, it's going to stop, this too will pass. And we kept passing him back and forth. Like, we actually got a pretty good system of passing him back and forth so that he always has attention. He really, really craves attention and touch. But we obviously, like, we each need a break. And so we've gotten this really good system of just going back and forth. Roshan does like 90% of the diapers. I feed him. What else? When I'm feeding him, Roshan will be around so that if he starts screaming or getting upset or needs to burp or something like that, I can hand him off in like 5 seconds, which is unbelievably good for my mental calm. But then, just like people claimed, around 6.5 weeks, which is about a week ago, he finally calmed down. I don't know what happened. He just grew out of it, and now you can see he's pretty calm. He's a fairly chill baby now.
That's why they say it takes time for you to get to know your baby and for your baby to get to know you and for that communication to get established and for the baby to settle down. So yeah, it's really nice how you illustrated the fact that it is bumpy. You don't know when the bump is going to come. Sometimes it's early, sometimes it's in the middle, and you will ride over the bump sooner or later. And the way to ride over it, there is no formula. You just have to hang in there. You have to see what's working for your baby, and you have to trust that you'll figure it out.
We were discussing just about just that this seems to me like that first week actually felt like an extension of labor. Exactly. For the same reasons also, because there's this, especially this 12-hour kind of all-night Jagran feeding thing that's happening. Is like Katy's also half asleep, he's also half asleep. Yeah. It's exactly like being back in labor. And of course, the same people are messaging us.
I think it's interesting how the challenges that you face during pregnancy, labor and birth are there because they're meant to prepare you for parenting.
Yeah.
All the, the emotional ups and downs, the getting to know each other, being able to accept uncertainty, figuring things out as they are happening. All these challenges are practice for parenting. So I think it's your story brings that out so well. Right?
One more thing about lockdown, though. I mean, I know we both really wish that our parents were here. So that's just like, let's get that out of the way. Parents, if you're watching, we miss you and we wish you were here. That being said, it's been a whole different level of intimacy in our little family. So becoming a triad as opposed to just a couple. We have had, I think, I did not expect this level of autonomy, which is scary. If the baby says something weird, I want, my mother or some other or his mother to be able to say, oh, that's normal, or, oh, we should take the baby to the doctor. Everything that we figure out gives us a little bit more confidence. Every time we figure out one more way to soothe him when he cries. He was very fussy for almost a month. And it was really hard, but it also gave us this opportunity to figure out, okay, well, what is this baby like? What does he want from us? And figuring out those things and being able to soothe him is actually this kind of tremendously sweet kind of process. And I didn't, people say, oh, you bond with your baby by doing, by like changing their diapers and soothing them when they're fussy. Is like, that doesn't sound fun and like bonding. That sounds kind of rough. But then, of course, when you're in it, there's this kind of specialness to think like, oh, I am the person who can bring succor to this little human who cannot be soothed and who cannot soothe himself, and he needs us. And so that is actually like feels quite special.
Awesome.
But yeah, no, I think also our bond between me and Roshan as parents has also been really solidified by being in lockdown and not not having the outlets that we usually would, and really just being forced to say, okay, well, this is exactly the option that we have, is interacting with each other, no blowing off steam with friends, no getting out of the house for a minute. You just have to deal. You have to deal with it hard, and it kind of is awful, but it's actually kind of also positive. So I don't know. It's let us, I think, have I think it's been strengthening to our bond. Yeah.
I'm sure it has.
Okay.
Thanks so much for sharing your beautiful story, and I love how it all comes together so well, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people will feel very inspired. Thanks so much, and wish you all the best for the days ahead.
Well, thank you for letting us share it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.